an original.
From Story Studio Network.
Well, here we go. It is the 25th day of July as we record this session of Now and Next. Welcome in. Dave Trafford here from Story Studio Network. And we are going to get to the story of the month, the past month. It's been extraordinary. And it continues. And that is, of course, how things are playing out, unraveling, unrolling, rolling out, whatever, on the U.S. election campaign. And as we speak, there's still a lot of activity there. Will Trump debate Harris? Will he not debate Harris? He's committed to. We don't know. So we're going to do a bit of a timeline, as they would say in the newsroom, the tick-tock, on what brought us to this stage. And then we're going to bring some analysis to the whole picture, because we've got some fairly smart people in the wings here. We're going to look at this and tell us, okay, yeah, I know that's what's on the headline. That's what's top of mind. That's the first reaction. But here's the second and third thing that comes to mind that you really need to consider. This has become a cultural phenomenon as much as anything else. So we're going to get to that. Just some housekeeping first. We've been doing a little bit of background cleaning up in the back end of Now and Next, and we have discovered that you guys really like us, so thank you. Thanks for joining. Thanks for sharing. We don't say it often enough. We did some dives into the analytics of this program, and it's really interesting to see. For those of you who join the show, the average consumption of one of our episodes, it could be anything from 20 minutes to 50 minutes, doesn't really seem to matter, is in the high 80% average, meaning that you guys hang in there for most of the show. So thank you for that. We really do appreciate it. If you've got a thought on the show, you can find me on social media at Dave Trafford, and let us know what you think. And additionally, On the Ledge, our Ontario Politics podcast, similarly, high engagement level. Like over the last 6 years we've been doing this show, On the Ledge, 92% retention rate. So thanks for your attention and thanks for your time. And it's nice to know that we're not just sitting in a room talking to ourselves. It's all good. And next week on Now and Next, we will have as promised, the report card on Olivia Chow. How has she done in her first year as mayor of the city of Toronto, succeeding John Tory in the mayor's chair at Nathan Phillips Square? So we will have our high-flying panel in here. Lindsay Broadhead, Bob Reed, Henry Akins, and Brad Ross will be joining us for that. And they all have experience with and around City Hall firsthand as communications experts, and, serve them with the public service as well. So it'll be really cool. If you've got a thought or a question or a comment about the mayor's performance, fire it off to me in social media. You can either DM or just, tag me on Facebook, LinkedIn, X. I'm on Threads. I don't really pay attention to it. Instagram, any one of those. So, yeah. What are your thoughts on Mayor Chow's first year in office in the city of Toronto? That's next week, right here on Now and Next. Okay, we got lots to talk about. So I would suggest let's just get at it. Well, last month on the U.S. presidential campaign trail has been something I would say that is akin to a Netflix series. It's being written and performed, though, in real time. And the opening episode came June 27th. It was the Trump-Biden CNN debate.
We'd be able to wipe out his debt. We'd be able to help make sure that all those things we need to do, child care, elder care, making sure that we continue to strengthen our health care system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID, with dealing with.
And it was nothing less than disastrous for President Biden.
If we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump?
Well, he's right. He did beat Medicare. He beat it to death, and he's destroying Medicare.
Questions around Biden's mental acuity, his physical capabilities, just sent shockwaves through the political class. And it was the morning coffee chatter at work. It was around the kitchen tables. There was even a significant line of questioning by the international media in the U.S. covering the NATO summit in Washington, D.C. In the next 2 weeks after that debate, just amounted to a daily barrage of calls for Biden to step away. Donors were pulling their funding. And all the while, Donald Trump and the Republicans were uncharacteristically disciplined and quiet. But then again, why lob criticisms when the Democrats were self-immolating in the public square? And then came July 13th.
You know, that's a little bit old, that chart. That chart's a couple of months old, and if you want to really see something that's said, take a look at what happened.
The assassination attempt on Trump was a mass shooting at a Pennsylvania rally. 2 people were killed, including the gunman. 3 others were wounded, including Donald Trump, and it prompted a fairly quick response from the White House.
There's no place at all for violence in politics in America. None. Zero.
And Biden decides to pause his campaign, and there was bipartisan calls to dial back on the rhetoric, just cool things down. And all of this happens just 2 days before the RNC convention was set to kick off in Milwaukee. It's a convention that would mark the final phase of Donald Trump's complete control over the GOP, and it was punctuated by a number of characters who appeared, including Nikki Haley.
My fellow Republicans, President Trump asked me to speak to this convention in the name of unity.
Now remember, just months ago, she was highly critical of Trump during her bid to win the GOP presidential nomination.
You don't have to agree with Trump 100% of the time to vote for him.
On Thursday of that week, July the 18th, Trump addresses the convention.
Thank you very, very much. Wow.
As a self-proclaimed changed man.
Friends, delegates, and fellow citizens, I stand before you this evening with a message of confidence, strength, and hope. 4 months from now, we will have an incredible victory, and we will begin the 4 greatest years in the history of our country. Together, we will launch a new era of safety, prosperity, and freedom for citizens of every race, religion, color, and creed. The discord and division in our society must be healed. We must heal it quickly. As Americans, we are bound together by a single fate and a shared destiny. We rise together or we fall apart. I am running to be president for all of America, not half of America, because there is no victory in winning for half of America.
He accepts the nomination as the Republican Party's candidate for president.
So tonight, with faith and devotion, I proudly accept your nomination for President of the United States. Thank you.
But the changed man doesn't really amount to a change in tone.
They're sending their murderers to the United States of America. This is going to be very bad. And bad things are going to happen, and you're seeing it happen all the time. That's why, to keep our families safe, the Republican platform promises to launch the largest deportation operation in the history of our country.
Nonetheless, despite Trump's rambling, off-the-script speech, the RNC convention is viewed as a success for the party as the Democrats continue to founder in a storm of their own making. Well, that is until 1:46 p.m. Eastern Time on July the 21st. Joe Biden breaks the internet.
President Joe Biden has just announced that he is dropping out of the 2024 presidential race.
He posts a letter to the American people on his personal X account. The letter was written on his personal letterhead. He announces his intention to step aside and give up his bid for re-election. 27 minutes later, Biden endorses VP Kamala Harris as the party's nominee.
And it is my great honor to have Joe Biden's endorsement in this race.
And by the end of the day, July the 22nd, Harris has secured the majority of delegate votes needed to become the presumptive Democrat nominee. And the Harris-Trump battle is joined. Harris running on her record as a longtime litigator and prosecutor, and Trump pretty much playing to type.
In those roles, I took on perpetrators of all kinds. Predators who abused women, fraudsters who ripped off consumers, cheaters who broke the rules for their own gain. So hear me when I say, I know Donald Trump's type.
For 3.5 years, Lion Kamala Harris has been the ultra-liberal driving force behind every single Biden catastrophe. She is a radical left lunatic who will destroy our country. If she ever gets the chance to get into office, we're not going to let that happen.
And in this campaign, I promise you, I will proudly put my record against his any day of the week.
You know, I was supposed to be nice. They say something happened to me when I got shot. I became nice. And when you're dealing with these people, they're very dangerous people. When you're dealing with them, you can't be too nice. You really can't be. So if you don't mind, I'm not going to be nice. Is that okay?
And if that early exchange isn't enough, the Democrats dug into the Fox News archives and revived an interview clip of Trump running mate J.D. Vance appearing on the Tucker Carlson show in 2021.
We're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. And it's just a basic fact. You look at Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, AOC, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children.
And so here we are, a month since the CNN debate that spawned a political narrative that would have been too outlandish for most movie scripts. We're just under 3 weeks from the Democratic Convention, set for the week of August 19th in Chicago, and 101 days until Election Day in the United States. To take stock of where we are and what it means for the next 14 weeks or so in U.S. politics, we're joined by John Wright. John is the Senior Vice President at Maru Public Opinion. Also, you hear him as the co-host on the wildly popular podcast On the Ledge. And David Shultz is a professor of political science and an authority on U.S. constitutional law at Hamline University in Minnesota. David, let's just start with you. Top of mind, situate this campaign for us. I mean, it's beyond historic.
Actually, where I think we are today on July 25th, 2024, is exactly where we thought we would be 4 years ago. And the reason why I say that is that 4 years ago, as Joe Biden was getting the nomination, to be for the Democratic Party, he eventually said that he planned on being a transitional president, that he was a president that was going to be sort of a gateway to the future. Somewhere along the line, about 2 years into his presidency, he changed his mind and decided to run. He wanted to run for a second term, much to the surprise of everybody. But then we're now back to where we were 4 years ago. When we listened to Joe Biden's speech on Wednesday, July 24th, he hearkened back to John Kennedy in talking about the passing of the torch. And so what I want to say is that one of the things that really I found very strange for the last month, and especially as of last Saturday or Sunday, when Biden said he was not going to run for re-election, the mainstream American media said we have chaos, things are disorder, things are completely out of sync. No, as of last Sunday, order was restored.
So this was a correction in the force.
This is a correction. This is what should have happened all along. It should have been either Kamala Harris or somebody else running for president, and that we would be going into the Democratic convention with Joe Biden as the elder statesperson, transitioning off, and somebody new.
John, at every turn, and talking about the reporting that David's referred to, you can't get through 3 sentences without somebody mentioning the polls say. And so on the one hand, you look at the way the polls have been used in this conversation. The one number that stuck out for me that I keep hearing reported was since Biden has announced his intention not to run and that Kamala Harris is going to be the presumptive nominee for the Democrats, the one number that stuck out to me was that there was an increase in the number of undecideds. And I thought, I wonder what John Wright would think about that.
Well, I've used a phrase before, and that is you have to paint your own wagon before somebody else paints yours. And I think right now the American public is taking a look at Kamala Harris and saying, who are you and what do you actually think? So you get independents and you have soft Republicans, if you can call them that, and you've got Democrats as well who have to make a decision about whether they're going to vote against Donald Trump or they're going to vote for her. And that's a really important ballot question there. So, what's interesting to me is that if you look at the spending rate of advertising over the next couple of months, the Republicans are likely to advertise the Democrats by 25-1. Like it's going to be huge press to define her. And what we've seen and heard so far is about the immigration at the border and how liberal she is. So I think we've yet to see the definition of Kamala Harris come about, but they have to get their script and get it out to people. The initial bounce that has occurred, which is part of that softening of the vote and the take a look, has basically moved her into a tie in the swing states. I mean, if you take into the margin of error in all of those, Donald Trump on the top line would edge forward in about 4 or 5 of those states, but the margin of error keeps her so close that it's probably close to a tie, and she is tied in Wisconsin. So I think there's early returns to say that the numbers are up, that the base in the Democratic Party is up and energized in that young vote, but that there's a good percentage of the American public who really don't know her. She's not wearing the inflation issue that Biden gets tarred with, but people are sitting back and waiting for her to be defined. And I think that's why this next couple of months is absolutely critical.
Yeah, I'm going to change your phrasing, John, a little bit. I think we're saying the same thing here. The way I phrase it is define or be defined.
Correct.
And Harris can't wait for her acceptance speech at the DNC to define herself or define Donald Trump. She's got to do it now. That's the first thing. The second thing I think about in terms of this race right now is the sense in which, as a pollster, you would know this. If you're doing a poll and you were saying, all right, if you were going to vote today, would you vote for Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., that's a different question than if you would ask, if the election were held today, are you voting for Kamala Harris, et cetera, like that. And the reason why I think this is important, again, for the point that you made here, it's a reevaluation. And one term that we learned this year is called double haters. People who hate both Trump and Biden. They're roughly 20% of the electorate. And with Biden out, now you've got 20% of the electorate, at least in theory, that has to make a new evaluation in terms of where they're going to go. That's a pretty significant, if that's true, that's a pretty significant chunk of the electorate.
I want to come back to the idea of, how the Republicans are efforting to define Harris in a second. But you both brought up this idea of the battleground states. And as I was watching the last, 3 weeks, David, you and I have talked forever about how important it is, the battleground states, that the swing states are going to make the difference. It's figuratively a handful of votes in a handful of counties that are really going to decide who lands in the White House. But as I was watching the numbers evolve, and again, back to the polls, if it was 5 to 7 swing states originally, those numbers creeped up, almost doubled at one point. I was looking at numbers that said, 13 states are in play now. So some of that has to be added into this equation as we move forward, because there are states where, the Democrats thought, well, we're pretty good here. No, not really. You're not. You're actually fighting for your own base in some of those places. So is Harris in a better place, or does that distract her from the grander objective?
I think at the very least, she starts with where Joe Biden was. But I actually think she's reset the dial in many situations at this point, partly because she's an open book. People are trying to figure out who she is. She doesn't necessarily have all the Biden baggage attached to her. I suspect some of those states that were appearing to open up, again, I don't have polling data on this, and I don't think anybody has good data on it yet. As I suspect, some of those states are going to close up again. They're open because of Biden's horrible performance. Take him out of the equation. And I think states like mine, Minnesota, Virginia, New Mexico, I think they probably move back into the leaning, if not solidly Democratic camp over the next few weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'll be curious, John, to see how that settles. I mean, really, it was like, stepping on in the pond, and all of a sudden, as soon as you put your foot down in the mud, you get this big cloud of dust, and eventually it kind of settles back down. Takes a little while, but then you get a clearer view of what's going on.
Well, I think if you take a combination of what Dave and I have said, or the two Daves and I have said, what you find is that there's this sweet spot in the middle that's yet to be activated. They're looking, they're watching, they're trying to figure this out. So whether it's 20% or 15% or whatever it is, she's getting a look, and it's yet to be solidified. I think the initial polling that's been done shows that if you want someone in this race right now who cares, using that with air quotes, on healthcare and education and caring about the environment and things like that, which candidate gets the most points. If you want somebody who's still on hard economy and on immigration, that the opponent gets that. So the question in my mind is always not so much with the people that are with you when you go to the dance, but the people that you might dance with while you're there. What are the key issues in the overlap of that Venn diagram that are going to move them in? And I think Dave's point is really critical. And that is that it then comes down to a campaign issue. We often talk about candidates, they've got to do this and they've got to do that. We're talking about a campaign team who's raised a huge amount of money and has to have very quickly identified what the social media buy is going to be, and the television buy, and all the other sort of stuff. They've got to get out of the field into the producing and out into helping define her with that narrow casting to those people. And the question is really, how long does it take to do that? Because the Trump campaign is onto it now. They've had some, missteps at the outset. But if they, having read the polls that I've seen, probably 10 or 12 of them since this has all taken place, if they just read the public polls, then you can tell their script. It's really very, very clear. But it's not so clear where she can be on some of those harder issues. And I think it's going to have to be more than, I'm a prosecutor and I know his type.
I'm curious to get your views on how this is unfolded, and as we speak, it's less than 4 days as this whole shift has happened, Biden giving up and passing the torch, et cetera. There had been a lot of conversation, David, to suggest that the best thing for the Democrats would be to have a robust, truncated primary sort of process going into that convention, so that at least, I guess, that the Democrats could kind of, in one voice, in a number of voices, scream out loud and say, this is what we are. We stand up on our hind legs and do what we need to do. And she would have, that is Harris would have, if she prevailed, earned it and won the nomination. The idea that overwhelmingly within, was about 24 hours, give or take, she has secured enough of the delegate votes to be the presumptive nominee. And I understand why that was important, because it's so close to the election, so close to the convention. And there's this whole nonsense of the virtual roll call that they have to have because Ohio somehow is standing up against the man. So where does all this play out?
I'm going to challenge that. And I'm going to say, if you're on K Street in Washington, D.C., you care about that. I don't think the broader American public cares about that at all. What I'm finding in so much of the reporting in the last 4 days is what I call inside baseball. This is inside the Beltway part stuff that Washington-based reporters are squawking about. But, okay, I teach at Hamline University. There's a major intersection not far from us, University and Snelling. It doesn't really matter in terms of what people understand, in terms of wherever you are. But pick some corner, in New York City, whatever. Go down to that corner and ask people, do you care? No. What do you care about? The economy. I care about inflation, et cetera, et cetera. I think this is much to do about nothing in terms of stuff. And I just don't think if you polled on it, people would care one way or the other.
Yeah, John, it's funny how, though, the Republicans almost reflexively jumped out and said this is undemocratic, you can't be possibly educated, flies in the face of everything that's going on. And it leads itself into both your points about defining the Harris campaign and Harris herself as a candidate. There seems to be this scattershot approach from the Republicans to try and nail her on something, whether it's she's a DEI hire, whether it's undemocratic to do what they're doing, whether it's J.D. Vance, suggesting that the country is run by, cat ladies and childless individuals. They're all over the place, but there's a certain undertone rumble from some of the Republicans saying, don't say that shit out loud because it's really going to hurt us. So their inability to kind of focus on the message or the definition at this stage is clearly is all over the place.
Well, let me suggest another approach to this, and that is that first of all, the Republicans who or the Trump team around them are very litigious. I mean, if anything comes up, they're going to use the courts to get attention and to go through it. And actually, they've had some victories along the way. But by putting this up early and keeping this theme alive in some way is a little bit like blowing on an ember in a fire you want to get going. Because what it really does is challenge the legitimacy of Kamala Harris to be not only the candidate, but to end up being the president of the United States. I mean, if they can get this narrative going even among their own base, then it's she stole it. Right. They stole it from us again. And remember, as Dave well knows, I mean, you get one set of ballots on the night, and then you get the counting for the next couple of days. Yep. So it may be that the Republicans again win on the night, but within the next 48 hours lose on, the other ballots that come in. So I think there's something insidious here that they're kind of moving towards. And I think it would be important for them to for people to really, really be careful about that. It is about the legitimacy of her process. It is about the legitimacy of her being president, and therefore it's in the Trump camp.
I agree. Yeah, and it's preparing the groundwork, exactly what you said, in case she beats him, which I'm not ruling that out right now. He now gets to make that same argument all over again. The other thing I was thinking about in terms of the intensity of the anger about her in Biden now, besides the fact that Biden, I think, was a weaker candidate, it reminds me of prize fighters. Prize fighters, the champion wins and retires and never gives the challenger a rematch. The one person Donald Trump loses to, who he'll never be able to beat again, have a chance to beat, is Joe Biden. I mean, the intensity of the frustration for the Republicans is that no matter what happens, Biden walks away as the person who beat him.
We're 20 minutes into our conversation, and clearly there's been a lot to talk about in this past 20 minutes, but we have done so without remarking on the fact that somebody tried to kill Donald Trump at a rally. And, 2 weeks ago, or a week and a half ago, David, that was the sort of the geological event that shifted everything in terms of people's perspective on this. And it frightened people. I mean, right. And it seems to me like this, okay, well, that has had little or no effect on what we're talking about. This makes it all the more remarkable.
Yeah. What assassination attempt? Okay, so let me mention the fact that a week ago, I sent out, and it's not going to get published now, a small piece, and we looked at, quote, is there an assassination bump in the polls? And looked at the 2 times Ford attempted assassination, Margaret Thatcher and Bolsonaro down in Brazil. In some cases, there's no bump whatsoever. In some cases, it's incredibly short term. I'm going to argue that whatever bump there would have been, it was over by the time Trump gave his acceptance speech. Had he stopped after 15 minutes, he would have had a great speech. Then he goes on and throws it all the way. So there is no attempted assassination bump whatsoever. What there will be, though, is probably 1,000 books over the next 50 years all about conspiracy theories. So all those people get to make a lot of money. But otherwise, what assassination attempt are you talking about?
Yeah, John, it's that sort of twist in the Netflix series that you needed to kind of reset the narrative. But it's remarkable to me that an event like that can seem to be so, relatively insignificant these short days later.
Well, it may be that because we live in another country and we're not having gun violence every day, nor have we had those many assassination attempts made on our leaders, that we find it shocking that people just go on. But the reality is that Americans, I think Dave would agree with me, it's part of their history. It's part of the normal course. Right. It's part of having mass shootings every day, and people recover and move on from that. What is interesting to me was the performance by the head of the Secret Service before Congress. And the stonewalling that went on, and that led eventually to her resigning from the post. But it almost seemed deliberate. It almost, it didn't seem ignorant. I mean, you could have answered some of the questions. You could have done something. So by her doing what she did does fuel even more conspiracy theories. And if you happen to get in the right algorithm on Twitter nowadays, or X, or whatever you want to call it, you are inundated with this conspiracy theory stuff. It just goes on and on and on. So in a way, I don't understand what she did and why she did what she did. And maybe she was stone cold faced because she knew that within 24 hours she was going to take one from the team and walk out of there. But it didn't answer any questions. In fact, what it did was it fueled far more that's going on. So again, I don't know what it does other than it destabilizes the ability to have a decent debate in the United States about the issues, because there's this thing running in the background, and it's going to get all the QAnon and all the other followers hooked into it.
Yeah, well, it's interesting when you say that, John, because when this happened on the weekend, and that was the 13th of July it happened, so 12 days ago, give or take, it was mass shooting number 338 in the United States in 2024. And mass shootings defined as 4 or more people wounded in the shooting or killed. It's up to 358 today. So it has been this. That's the thing that struck me. And I understand why people were so shocked and focused on it, because it literally happened live on television, which, and again, a presidential campaign, et cetera, and all of the Secret Service issues that went along with it. But boy, it's just another day that ends in Y.
But the only thing I'd say, I think, Dave, you're closer to this, but I think the convention speech that night that Trump gave, I think you're absolutely right. There were probably campaigners in the back lobby of the production booth who were high-fiving it after 16 minutes and kind of saying, we got it, we've won this. And then all of a sudden it was like, whoa, no, here we go again. He actually just picked up from the speech he'd left when the gunshot was fired and continued on. So I don't really think that it hurts him among the base at all. Like it's who they expect. I mean, it may have fooled Democrats and others who might have been inclined to go in that direction if there was a belief that he'd actually changed. But he is who he is, and I don't think it's changed anything.
The idea that, going into the debate and even post-debate, I think even more so, before Biden said, I'm calling it quits. David, I looked at this and watched the GOP convention, and I thought, here was, despite the last portion of Trump's speech, that whole week was the Republicans' effort, and I put that in air quotes, to create the impression of a big tent, because they talked about the Gold Star parents, they talked about the Jewish community very specifically and deliberately in prime time. They did a lot of that stuff that even the labor speech sounded a whole lot like a Democrat up there raging against the man. So there was this impression that they were trying to broaden the tent, a larger coalition. And it wasn't just about their base. On the other hand, Biden was in a place where he was having to revive his base. So, and to me, that was an interesting dynamic. Here we are 10 days later, give or take, and that whole dynamic has shifted entirely.
No, you're right. I think it was an incredibly successful Republican National Convention in terms of putting on the face they wanted, again, except for the last part of that of Trump's speech. And I think what has happened at this point is that since the Biden stepped down, is to use your phrase, all the narratives have shifted, and things are looking very different now for the fortunes of the two parties. I mean, just think about it at this point now. It's no longer a campaign about Biden, his age, and his mental acuity. Trump is now, 20 years older than Kamala Harris. It's his age, his mental acuity, his personality. Additionally, I'm going to make another argument and say everybody fully expects Trump to attack. And he said this yesterday. He's not going to be nice. He's going to go after Harris. It's going to be misogynist. It's going to be racist. It's going to be everything. But guess what? His base is already fired up. His language is not going to do anything to fire up his base even more. I think his comments about her are basically going to largely be blank bullets at this point, because everybody's expecting him to do what he's going to do.
Yeah, so with that in mind, John, I mean, whatever impression the convention may have left people with, that's just gone away with almost every syllable that Trump spits out at this point.
Sure. And it's kind of taken all of that and moved it over to a much more revitalized Democratic base. So you see the Democrats. And I mean, I was quite astounded where you can have 20,000 people on a phone-in line listening to people talking about the vice president. I mean, it's energized the black vote. It's particularly women, and particularly young people who, who will hopefully listen to Taylor Swift and go, as the vice president would hope, and go out and vote. But it seems to have taken a different coalition of people who were moving in the direction of Mr. Trump and revitalize them. That's where I would be watching this, because the subgroups of the American public make up the whole of the American public. And I think, it depends on how she's able to connect with them over the next 30 days. Dave, both Daves, I come back to the polling numbers where she's kind of dead even right now with him in the swing states, and she may be leading on the national vote. But in terms of the motivation to vote, I don't think that's defined yet. And as a result, I think we really have to be careful if the Republicans get into the marketplace and start pitching their hard approach down to the same people I've just been talking about. All they have to do is, in American politics, you just have to destabilize, a couple of percentage points, and it makes a big difference.
Yeah, I saw your piece this week, David, about the choice of vice presidents and the effect historically they have had on the winning candidates, et cetera. And the point being that, it kind of really doesn't really matter what they choose in terms of winning. But does it affect the possibility of weakening it? I mean, we go back to the McCain-Palin thing, and J.D. Vance is going to be he's going to be a loose cannon.
Yeah. The first rule of picking a vice president, do no harm. And then the second rule is if you can figure out some benefit. But otherwise, listen, I live in a country where polls indicate 40% of the American public cannot name who the vice president is. Do we really think that vice presidents matter? And I speak as the political scientist now who's actually written on this and worked with others. For the most part, with the exception of Sarah Palin, since essentially World War II, no vice president has really had an impact in the polls for the presidential candidate. So I think that all this talk and worry about saying it's got to be this person, that person for this swing state, et cetera, I think what Harris ought to do is pick somebody who she's comfortable with. And that's why I said, heck, why not? Defy conventional wisdom, go with a female voter or female vice president. If you actually think a candidate vice president matters, take a page from the Trump campaign. Pick somebody who you think is going to juice up your base even more. 2 women on the ticket, maybe that really does it. Because remember, women are 52% of the electorate in the United States right now. I would do everything I can to juice up female voters, to get them to turn out to vote.
I just remember that old saying that I learned in university. It was, once upon a time, there were 2 brothers, and one went on a ship and the other one became vice president of the United States, and they were never heard from again. And I would agree. It's an interesting gamble, Dave, in terms of who her running mate is, because on the one hand, there may be an argument to be made that she needs to offset it by a strong male. And there's a couple of candidates there, although I think, Cooper and Kelly are the ones that emerged, foremost at the moment to choose between. But there's also the gamble. And that's, as you said, David, I mean, she is wide open to energize a certain section of America and young people. And this goes to the subgroupings that I was talking about. Of course, exactly. And that would be the big gamble. But you know what? It certainly would set all of them apart, the 2 parties, and give them a script to go on.
Well, I think I was going to say, what else could happen here in this campaign, but the day ain't over. So we'll have to watch this. And, I muse at the idea that, David, about 2 or 3 months ago, we were talking about an October surprise. I mean, there's going to be surprises between now and October, no doubt, the way this whole thing has unfolded, to see how the ground may shift in the campaign. So we will commit to coming back and, resetting the chessboard again in the next month or so as this thing kind of really gets into full swing. John Wright, David Shultz, thank you. This has been important and insightful. It's always good to have you guys on the show.
Thanks so much, Dave.
My pleasure.
Pay no attention to that man behind the Now and Next is Story Studio Network's flagship podcast, produced by our chief executive producer, Dave Trafford, and supported by our entire SSN team, including our senior producers, Becky Coles and Jen Hudson, our technical producer and audio editor, Mike Trutler. Jamie Nickerson is our production manager, and our sonic logo designer is Greg McDonald. Also, I'm Erin Trafford, Queen of the Universe.
And that's all I have to say about that.
Okay, everybody, that's a wrap.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.